everybody's trying to get rid of me. Okay, so I'm actually not going to be able to stay on because I'm sitting here with my mom. So it is a usual Thursday evening would be greeting my mom and thanking David for, for putting Granny on screen. And sadly, this Thursday night, so we're sitting Shiva, and well, I'm not personally, but sitting with my mom Shiva. And I really just wanted to say thank you to my lovely friend, you know who you are, who has sponsored this share for her wonderful mum, and has shared Le'ilu Nishmas as well for Shaul David ben Shmuel Pesach. You know, one of the things that we all know is that nobody knows where we're going to be from one moment to the next. So we're grateful for everything that we have. And it really is a privilege to have us have Ora here with us on this challenging Thursday night, taking us into Shabbos. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what he is doing for each and every one of us. And we just daven for everybody's refuahs, Yeshuas, and everybody should just really be able to take in, to learn, to grow, and to really just utilize this amazing time that we have. I didn't expect to be in Eretz Yisrael, so that is one of the perks. And I even got to get to the Kaisel today, and in my tefillahs made sure that I said loudly to Hashem for every single person who joins me in any of my learning programs, and that is also for tonight. So thank you all. Please make sure to also have a look and follow all the things that we're going to have, please God, with Rebbetzin Silva. But in the meantime, Ora, you were chosen tonight to be here already a while ago. And wasn't that amazing? We had a few weeks of preparation. Not, oh my gosh, Ora. So it's really an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And I'm sorry and comfort to those who are sitting. And just an alias neshama for all in question, and just as you said, Yeshua and Refuah and whoever's waiting for whatever should come to fruition.
It's also Rachel Bas Eliyahu, and that is Elaine's mom. So Imyat Hashem, good things.
So thank you, Mrs. Gold, Elaine. But I have to, for the honor. Okay, so for those of you who've joined me before, you know that the topic that I love is talking about the energy and the power of the month. But we're at a bit of a weird point because we've just finished Shavuot, and we're not near enough yet to Rosh Chodesh for me to start talking about next month yet. So I'm going to talk about something else. But I want to follow on from where we just finished off in terms of the calendar and the Chagim. We've just stepped out of Shavuot. So I want to talk about where to from here, because I'm just trying to think. I don't think I gave the Shavuos one to this group, but just the idea of having stepped out of just having received the Torah, and kind of where do we carry on from there. So I know you all know where to carry on from there, because the rest of you really is involved in kind of integrating that Torah into the way that we live. And today I want to talk a little bit about integrating that Torah into the way that we live. And I want to base this idea on the power of our foremothers and forefathers, on the topic of how we can relate to our foremothers and forefathers, and what that has to do with our own practice of Torah in real life today in 2023. So we know that when we talk about the forefathers, Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and the foremothers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, we talk about them as people who are very integral to our identity. And we read and refer to a lot of stories, and we go back to all the stories that we do know and read them at Midrashim and kind of try to glean things about who they were as people. And it's sometimes difficult to relate to, because, they do often seem like people who are just out of our reach. and you know, much greater than we could ever wish to be. But then a lot of those stories we see are not people who sort of began their lives in, you know, a lot of them began their lives in humble ways, in kind of corrupt surroundings. It's not that they were all born, you know, other cinemas. They became the people who they became. By the way, I should just take a second aside to say thank you so much to whoever chooses to stay on screen. I totally get it that there are those of you that would like to be lying in bed or doing whatever it is that you're doing. So I get why your screen's off, but thank you to those who are there, because as I've mentioned before, it's quite hard to like sort of speak into the void. So it's just good to see a few like blinking, smiling faces. Thank you. Okay. So when we talk about our foremothers and forefathers, just to kind of try and make this relatable, is that when we talk about how integral they are to who we are, we're not just talking about it as something historic. We're talking about it as something that is a little bit part of our DNA. We talk about the fact that this is where we come from. There really is something from our fathers and mothers that is still a part of us, however sort of unrelatable they may seem. So let's try and make this a little bit more relatable, that in a sense, they were brought into the world to fulfill a mission, and we are here to continue whatever mission it is that they were brought into the world to fulfill. So we know that at the time that Abraham arrived in the world, there was no God consciousness in the world. The world had kind of dropped to such a place that it was a corrupt place. There was no idea of God in the world. And at a very young age, Abram discovers God. He begins the movement of monotheism. He does the very first version of Kiruv ever. He does outreach. He affects many people, and he kind of revives God consciousness in the world. And he marries Sarah, and they bring this into the world together as a partnership. They have Yitzchak, he has Yaakov, and this is kind of the beginning of the Jewish people. So when we talk about them being considered our mothers and fathers, yes, it's true that they kind of started off Judaism as we know it. But if we say that they are fathers and mothers, it must mean, you know, if you look at the lineage, they can't all be our fathers and mothers. Because, for example, if do we come from Rachel or do we come from Leah? It had to be one or the other. But yet we refer to all of them. They are all equally our mothers and all equally our fathers. It must be something outside of just lineage and sort of the obvious kind of following like the family tree, what it is that we're talking about. So what exactly is the role of the matriarchs and patriarchs in our lives? How does their reality affect our reality? And how do we kind of fit into that? So there's this Kabbalistic idea that God has many different names. And I'm sure you've heard some of those names more often and some of those less often, but you'll be familiar with the fact that we refer to God in more ways than with just one name. And none of them are exclusive names, because really what any of those names are describing are different manifestations of Hashem. In other words, a human being has a name, and the name is meant to reveal that person's essence. That's why we're quite careful with what we name a child, because we're trying to reveal the deepest part of who that human will be in the world. Hashem's names are not the same because Hashem is infinite. So he is not limited by just one name. There is no one essence. He is so many things that each name just describes a different facet of who he is. So in fact, it tells us the story that when Moshe stood at the burning bush and he was about to be sent into Egypt, he asks Hashem and he says, listen, I'm going on a mission to your Jewish people. And the first question they're going to ask me is, who is it that's sending you with this message? Like, what is the messenger's name? So Moshe says, what am I supposed to tell them? So Hashem says, I have no specific name, but I'm called according to my activity at the time. What this means on a deeper level is, as we said, that God is beyond description. And a name describes a person's one essence. He doesn't have just one essence. Because Hashem transcends definition and description, so Hashem says, if I, for example, choose to manifest myself in a certain way, then that's my name. So if I choose to manifest myself in chesed, then I'm called Kael. If I choose to manifest myself by waging war against the wicked, I'm called Tsevaot. So in other words, every name that we hear referring to Hashem is just manifesting a different energy or a different essence of Hashem, but none of them define him because he is undefinable. But there are two names that are probably the most common names that we've heard referring to Hashem. When we say Hashem, Hashem is Hashem, the name, okay? But the two names that we'll see sort of biblically referred to are the names Elohim, and the name that we don't pronounce it as it is, but we say it's a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, and we don't say those names in one word, but those are two very familiar names of Hashem. And both of those names have got a very different meaning to each other because both of them are telling us about a different kind of essence of Hashem. So The name Elohim, which we are familiar with and have heard, it's mentioned often biblically. The name Elohim is a name that is associated with the concept of, if you've ever heard of this idea before, called tzimtzum, which is contraction, okay? Which means basically where Hashem conceals his infinity and makes room for a finite existence. In other words, he, in a sense, almost sort of like removes himself in order to allow space for us, okay? In order for us to allow us to kind of relate to him in some way. So if you look in the book of Bereshit, you'll see that in all the days of creation, the only name that's mentioned is the name Elohim. Bereshit bara Elohim, Hashem created, and in each day it mentions that name again. Why? Because through all the days of creation, what Hashem is basically creating and designing is a world of concealment, a world where he can hide himself, this world that is created by this infinite presence who is making room in his infinite presence for a finite world. So for a world where his infinity and his presence won't be obvious, a world where it's actually totally possible to not even be conscious of who created it or that it was created, okay? It's possible to go through this world and almost ignore the fact that there's a creator if you want to. Hashem created a world that you could live under the illusion that it's all just happenstance, coincidence, science, whatever you want to put it down to. That is called Elohim, the ability to remove the infiniteness to create space for humans, okay? Now, there's another name which we said is a commonly referred to name, is the name Yud and K and Vav and K. Now, this name is a name where this name is because we have a purpose in this world, that although Hashem chose to create this tzimtzum, this sort of making himself finite in a sense, our purpose in this world is to reveal his presence, is to not live in a world where he's hidden and just accept that it's hidden. We can't see it, so it must be coincidence. Our purpose here is to reveal God's infinite presence, and that infinite presence is found in the name Yud and K and Vav and K. Now, I'm going to get, and within that name, the way that we know that it's about the infinite presence is because the name Yud and K and Vav and K stands for Haya, Haveh, V'yeh. He was, he is, he always will be. He is infinite and beyond and above time and space and everything that limits us as human beings, okay? That's the essence of what that name means, okay? Now, I'm going to get a little bit complicated for a minute, so forgive me, like a teeny bit Kabbalistic, okay? But then we'll come back to this, because remember, we're trying to answer a question here, which actually is, what do the Abot and Imahot have to do with us? Okay, so I haven't forgotten that question. We're just shelving that for 1 second to get through this concept. Okay, so now in this name that is Yud and K and Vav and K, of course, this name also has different ways of manifesting itself, because even in this name that describes the infiniteness of Hashem, it's not one-dimensional. Hashem's more complicated than that. He has many different manifestations, even in his infiniteness, okay? So for any of you who actually have been in my classes when we talk about the power of each month, one of the ideas we talk about is that even every single month has a different order of the letters of Hashem's name. So even though it's Yud and K and Vav and K, they come up in different orders every month, and that different order affects something to do with the energy of the month. Okay, so that's why even this name, Yud and K and Vav and K, has got different ways of manifesting itself. Now, there's two ways, this is the complicated bit just for a second, but it's not really complicated, okay? There's two ways that this can manifest itself that are relevant to the message we are trying to draw out of this, and that is as follows. You know that when you take a gematria out of a word, there's different ways of making a gematria. So the obvious way is, for example, if the word is Yud and K and Vav and K, then the first letter is Yud, so that's 10, K is 5, etc., etc. That's regular gematria. Now, there's more complicated ways of taking a gematria out of a word, and we're going to look at those two slightly more complicated ways of taking a gematria out of a word in order to draw out the two manifestations of this name, Yud and K and Vav and K, okay? okay? One doesn't matter. You don't have to get, like, you don't have to worry about the technicalities. You'll understand the finishing message of this, okay? The one way of taking the gematria out, and this is not just in this idea, this is other places we can find this, is that when you take a gematria out of a word, you take a gematria out of the whole letter. So for example, if the first letter is yud, you're going to look at that word like yud, vav, dalet. You're actually going to spell out the yud, okay? When you say the letter vav, you're going to say vav, aleph, vav. You're going to spell out each letter, and it's a way of getting a gematria out of a word. And it's one of the different ways that Hashem manifests himself. So to make this like simple-ish, if we were to take each of these letters of the word yud and k and vav and k and turn them into that kind of gematria where you are spelling out the letters, there's two different ways to spell out the letters. This is as complicated as it's going to get, okay? So I apologize if people are a little bit lost here, but I'll try to clarify. There's two different ways to get this spelling, okay? One of them is for the vowels to use the letter aleph, and one of them for the vowels is to use the letter hey, okay? It's the same thing because it's the same sound. So for example, in the word vav, it would be like where you're using a vav aleph vav or a vav hey vav. It makes the same sound, it's vav, but it's just done in two different ways, okay? I'm looking at the people who are looking at me on the screen who are nodding, so it means that this is making sense to some people. If you'd like to come on screen and like shake your head and tell me that this isn't making sense, I'm happy to explain it again, okay? But not if this is making sense. Blink and look, you know, okay, good. So I'm looking at the people who are on screen, I'm going with you, okay? So more nodders, okay, excellent. All right, so if we go with these two gematrias of Hashem's name, which is going to give us some insight into two different manifestations of who Hashem is in this infinite presence, it tells us that in this gematria where we use the aleph, the numerical value comes to 45. And if we use it with a hey, the numerical value comes to 52. Okay. Now, the one is called Shem Ma, which is a mem hey, and the one is called Shem Ban. Okay, these are the two names that we're going to be referring to. The one with the aleph is called the name of Ma, and the name with the one with the hey is called the name of Ban. And we're going to use these two to explain what are the two different properties of Hashem in his infiniteness, and how on earth are we going to relate to this, and then how on earth are we going to tie this into the forefathers and foremothers and what they have to do with us and our today's practice and integration of Torah into our own personal lives. Okay, so right, the difference between those two ways of doing a gematria is one is an aleph and one is a hey. Now in the world of mystical understanding of the aleph beit, every letter of the aleph beit has a different significance. Every letter has a different meaning to it. It's got to do with like the structure of the letter, where it is on the line, if there's a gap in the letter. I'm sure we could have, not by me, but somebody who's much more, you know, a lesson on each one of these letters could take us probably a few weeks. Okay, there's a lot of depth to the actual letters of the aleph beit and why they're structured like that and why they're called that, etc. But what we do know is that what is the aleph significant of? Well, first of all, aleph we know is always one. It's got to do with godliness. It's the first letter. But also, if you turn the letter aleph around, it gives you an insight into the essence of the word, because if you turn it around, it comes to the word pele, which means a wonder, a miracle, something that's a bit otherworldly. It's not really part of this world. So the essence of this letter aleph is transcendence, something a bit out of this world, something not part of this physical world. Now, the hey, in Kabbalah, the hey always represents speech, dibur. And in fact, and the reason it represents speech is because if you sound out the letter hey, it's like a breath. So it's the idea of sort of like the expressing of some kind of sound. And I don't know if any of you remember, because I think I did a Nissan shiur when we were just pre-Pesach for this group, I think. I spoke about the idea that that letter hey was the letter that represented the month of Nisan. And the reason that it represented the month of Nisan, or one of the ideas around that, was that it says that Behei nivra ha'olam. With the letter hey, Hashem created the world. And we know that Hashem spoke the world into existence. So hey has got something to do with creativity that comes through speech. Okay, so now if you want to see the difference between the aleph and the hey, the aleph is pele, wonder, miracle, something out of this physical world. And hey actually is quite like in this world because it's speech, it's creativity, it's bringing something into existence. Okay, now we need to relate this back to what this has to do with what we're talking about. Okay, so now when we talk about the idea of speech, because we're talking about this hey that is about this power of speech, right? Speech has got two different ideas associated with it. On the one hand, a word is nothing by itself. It's only really as good as like the context you place it in. What does it mean until you give it a context? On the other hand, we know that words have an enormous, enormous power. So you can take a thought, and when you put it into speech, you reveal ideas that were unrevealed, and you communicate something in a very powerful way. And I mean, we know that words are powerful positively, and we know that words are powerful negatively. So this idea of this hey and this power of speech is something that can bring huge building into the world and potentially also huge destruction into the world. Words are very, very powerful. Now, all words really are, words don't create an idea. All words really do is take an idea that was already in the world and kind of bring it into clarity and bring it into sort of like depth. So it's taking something that already existed, verbalizing it, and making something deeper, sort of revealing something that was already there. But there's an enormous power in that revelation of something that was already there. So for example, let's just make this a little bit practical. You can understand something in your head, a concept in your head. But if you say that concept out loud, you deepen your understanding of it. You clarify your understanding of it. And you discover new things in it. The more you say it out loud, the more you see different aspects of it and understand it in a different way. So it's the same as, for example, an emotion. You can feel an emotion. When you speak the emotion, you're giving it like gravitas. So for example, if you're feeling a bit of anger, but now you start talking about how angry you feel, you actually start feeling more angry, right? We're starting to give it power. So words can give an emotion power. It takes something that exists already, but brings it into like real existence. Speech fuels emotions. So if you express love, you feel deeper love. It's nice to have love like in your thoughts, but when you say I love you and you express your love, that builds that emotion of love. So now let's relate this idea back to the concept of these two manifestations of Hashem's name, which we've called Ma, the one that's with the Aleph, and Ban, which is the one that's with the Hey. Ma, Aleph being the one that's about the transcendental world of miracles, and Hey being the one that's the world of speech and this world that we're living in. Okay, so now the one is the Aleph, means it relates to Hashem in his purest form. It's back to like the most deepest, most spiritual essence of who Hashem is. And the Hey, which represents speech, represents bringing it down into this world. So the combination of the Aleph and the Hey would be taking that original purity, taking that essence of who Hashem is, that transcendental holiness, and bringing it down into this ordinary, mundane, potentially unholy world. That is the combination of using that letter, Aleph and Hey, together to bring it down into the finite world. Now, we know that in Judaism, we need the combination of the Aleph and Hey, okay? We need to take the Ma and the Ban, the Aleph and the Hey, because we need to make a combination between the upper world of the transcendental and the godly and the holy and the spiritual, and the lower world of the mundane and the real life and the life that we find ourselves in. And as Jews, we know that our life alternates constantly between the two. So for example, we start off the day with tefillah, right? Tefillah is a very Aleph experience, okay? It's a Ma experience, an experience of not being really in this world. We kind of are removing ourselves from this physical, mundane world to be in a space where we're talking to Hashem, where we're in a kind of a meditation, where we're expressing our deepest yearnings and our spiritual self. That's a world of kind of like the But as the Talmud says, Hanheg bahem derech eretz. You then go into the world and you implement it. You make it work, okay? So what that means is, we said the purpose of creation is to reveal Hashem in the world. And that means bringing heaven down to earth. Now, parts of our experience are always going to be detached. Tefillah and davening is always meant to be detached. You're not supposed to be davening while you're watching TV or busy on your phone. You're supposed to find a quiet space, take 3 steps backwards, 3 steps forward, close your eyes, shuckle, whatever it is that you do to kind of enhance the experience. But you're supposed to detach yourself. It's very meditative. But you can't pray all day. You can't be in a space of only prayer all day long. You then leave that space and you come back into this world. And then you take what you got from that space and make it real over here in the world that we find ourselves in. And actually, you notice that Judaism dwells on a lot of the mundane. I mean, a lot of the mitzvahs are to do with things like bracha you say after the toilet, things you say on food. It's not spending your day in, an elevated space all the time. It's how do you conduct yourself in the day-to-day mundane activities that human beings do. It does seem mundane. So in a sense, what we're often doing is, what it looks like on the outside is that we're trying to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. In other words, we're trying to elevate those things around us and making them something holy. So for example, a mikveh is just a bath of water. Okay, but when a woman immerses in that mikveh at the right time of the month with the correct preparation and the correct focus and the correct tefillah, it becomes a holy experience. You've just elevated water to something holy. When a woman lights candles on a Friday at the right time with the right bracha before Shabbos comes in, candles that really could be on anybody's dining room table now become something that has holiness. A piece of parchment can become a mezuzah. So constantly we have this opportunity to upgrade the ordinary world around us and turn it into something extraordinary. But we say now that there needs to be this constant unity between the world of the Aleph and the world of the Hey, the unification of the transcendent and detached and the revealed and the worldly. So why do we need that combination? Why, if we were really holy, why can't we just reside in the space of davening all day long, sitting on a mountaintop, meditating all day from morning to night? Wouldn't that be the ultimate in holiness? So you'll notice that actually, it's not a Jewish idea, the idea of the guru who lives at the top of the mountain and doesn't, ever interact with humans. Because actually, quite honestly, that person has not reached holiness because that person has never had to interact with a mother-in-law or an annoying child or a irritating boss or whatever it is. That's really where the holiness that we're talking about comes in, is the taking that and bringing it down into this world and integrating it into this world. But what we're also saying is that as much as we're talking about trying to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary by taking, the things around us and elevating them and making them something deeper, there's also the idea that one doesn't work without the other. On either side, one doesn't work without the other. So what that means is, if we are busy davening and meditating and just remaining in the spiritual world, you're going to be like the guru who sits on top of the mountain. You're never going to interact with this mundane world in order to elevate it. You need the opportunity to elevate it. But in order to elevate the mundane world, we first have to encounter spirituality in its most original, pure, perfect form. So you need the Aleph and you need the Hey. The Aleph is the interaction with Hashem in his purest original form. The Hey is how do you bring that into the world, but you cannot have one without the other. So now let's go back to the speech example that we gave before, which we said the purpose of speech is to express an idea and to bring it into the world. But before you express that idea, that's the Hey, right? Bringing speech into the world. Before you express that idea, you have to have some kind of clarity about the idea that you're going to express. You have to go back to the original thought, right? So the idea doesn't begin with words. Words is the Hey. It began with an Aleph, was the original, pure, perfect thought. Now, when you brought it into Hey, into speech, you revealed it. You gave it clarity. You gave it depth. But before all that came a pure, perfect, original thought. And then the Hey gave it this power of kind of revelation. So if we speak without thinking, it doesn't work. Okay. And if we think without speaking, it doesn't work either, because then that idea will never have the opportunity to be revealed and clarified and deepened. So there needs to be a relationship between both of these things. And we said before, a typical Jew starts the day with prayer at the beginning of the day, moving away, spiritual immersion. But then we take that power of Aleph, and we bring it into the world of Hey. And we bring it into the world of eating and sleeping and the ordinary. Okay. So now, and in fact, if you look at even the way the Jewish year works, look at the order of how the calendar works, right? So we start off the year, okay, we have this debate whether the year starts in Tishrei or Nisan. We've just had Nisan, we said it's the beginning of the year from as a nation. But in terms of our individual start to the year, right? The year starts with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Now, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are a real Aleph. right? It's a real space of, it builds till you're standing on Yom Kippur, you and Hashem, and you're totally in a space of transcendence because you've removed yourself from food and from wearing leather and from physical contact and from any kind of adorning your body. So you're in a space where you're almost like an angel. We've really like removed ourselves into this very deep space of Aleph, of being at one with the oneness of Hashem. But then the whole year is not Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur has to end. And then you're supposed to take Yom Kippur with you into the rest of the year, but not like that, not in that state of fasting and being with Hashem and being in that. Now you've got to take the power you derived from that and bring it into the rest of the world. And in fact, later on in the year, we celebrate a Chag, which couldn't be more opposite to Yom Kippur, which is Purim. And it says that the sages tell us that actually Purim is very deeply connected to Yom Kippur, interestingly, even though superficially it doesn't seem to be in any way connected, okay? Because Yom Kippur's real name is Yom Kippurim, which it says, if you look at that word, it could also be Yom Kippurim, a day like Purim. Now that superficially doesn't make sense. There's nothing about Yom Kippur that's like Purim, okay? On Yom Kippur, we are in the world of one. On Purim, you couldn't be more in the world of, hey, I mean, we're drinking and celebrating and dressing up and there's nothing there that looks like having detached ourselves from this world. On Purim, we are fully immersed in this physical world. So it looks like the day couldn't be more opposite. But the Zohar says that in a sense, Purim is higher than Yom Kippur, because on Yom Kippur, and it says, almost it's like if it says Yom Kippurim, it's saying Yom Kippur is holy, but it's not quite where Purim is. Isn't that strange? So it says the ultimate connection to Hashem is actually Purim. Why? Because Purim is where we serve Hashem within this world. But you can't have a Purim without a Yom Kippur. You have to have experienced the pure oneness to get to a place where you're ready to experience the Purim. In other words, if you just entered the Purim as a Purim, being drunk and wild and whatever happens is not this idea. That's missing the point. The point is that you started off with the Aleph, and then you take the power that you got from that. And then when you have Purim in a holy way, it means we know there's a holy way to drink, and there's a holy way to express oneself in a way that's not like you drink just till it helps you kind of loosen up to reveal deep Torah, not to act ridiculous, right? That there's a holy way to enter that space. So that is the concept of why it's called Yom Kippurim, that it's actually almost in a sense holier than Yom Kippur if you're able to get to that space of having taken that Aleph and brought it down to Hey. Now, back to the beginning again, because now we've shared this idea of there were two names of Hashem that were the most familiar. Elohim, which is this name of Tzimtzum, was Hashem retracting himself from the world and making space for us. But our job in the world is to reveal that which he's hidden. And the way we reveal it is through the name Yud and K and Vav and K. But Yud and K and Vav and K has two different aspects that we are highlighting. The aspect of the transcendental, the oneness with Hashem, the Aleph, and the aspect of, hey, speech, communication, this real world over here. Now, our question originally was, what do the Avot and Imahot have to do with us, which so far has had nothing to do with this conversation whatsoever. Now let's pull the two together. Okay. And also, there's another interesting question, just while we're on the topic, which is, have you ever wondered why there are 3 fathers and 4 mothers? Why is it imbalanced like that? Like, why wasn't it even? Okay, so we're going to try and answer both those questions. So, Kabbalah says that these two names of Hashem, this Aleph and this Hey, these two different aspects of the Yud and K and Vav and K, the detached and otherworldly and the this world and the communicative, these represent the Avot and Imahot. These represent our forefathers and foremothers. And this, the marriage of our forefathers and foremothers, what you see in each of those unions and marriages is the ultimate coming together of Ma and Ban, of Aleph and Hey, of transcendental and this worldly, of infinite oneness with Hashem and speech and communication and bringing it into this world. That is what each of those unions and marriages was about. So it says each one of their missions as an individual and as a couple was this idea of revealing Hashem through this Yud and K and Vav and K. And the Avot are the representative of Ma, of Aleph, of the pure and the infinite. And the Imahot are the implementation and the interaction through communication, through the Hey, in this physical world. And this, by the way, is also the difference between masculine and feminine. Now, I'm saying that broadly because actually the way we see it is often actually the difference between men and women, but it would be a bit general to say that because there are some men who are very good communicators and some women who are not so great. But generally, if we were to say who is the gender who has more of a proclivity to talking and to communication, people may say woman, okay? So often speech is associated with women and having a more refined ability to communicate. Again, I'm generalizing. If there's any men in the background who feel that they're excellent communicators, this is not an offense to anyone. Excellent. But this is the difference between masculine and feminine energy, which is that the masculine energy, the avot energy, the aleph energy is actually associated with the creation of newness. It's this oneness, this purity, this newness, the conception of an idea at its highest place, in its highest form. And feminine energy, foremother energy, imachot energy, hay energy, is taking that idea, that newness, and processing it and giving birth to it and bringing it into this world. And of course, the clearest place to see this relationship between masculine and feminine is in the way that procreation works. Because if you look at the relationship between what a man brings to that story and what a woman brings to that story, is that really the male contribution is potential life. But that potential life will die out unless the feminine aspect is brought to that. Now, you can't have one without the other. They're both pretty important, okay? But the newness of that potential of life disappears unless there's something or someone or some energy to take that and nurture it and grow it and turn it into life and birth it and bring it into this world. That is the ultimate relationship between aleph and hay, is the way that a child comes to be, is the newness, the idea, the concept, the potential, and then the growing and the nurturing and the birthing. And that is the relationship between masculine and feminine, and the idea of the imas and the avos. So the role of the avot, if you look, starting from Abraham's role and what he brought into the world was to find that newness, was to discover monotheism, was to discover that there was a God in the world. That was his discovery, and to discover and to bring into the world belief in God and the power of God in creation and the infinity of God. That was his role. And then the role of the matriarch was to make that work by interacting with and bringing that into this physical world. And we can see so many examples of this. I'm just going to draw out one or two, but there's so many examples of this. And maybe as you read other Torah stories that mention the imagery of the ideas of the imas and avos, you'll look for this dynamic. Because if you look at the story of, for example, the story of Avram, who has Yishmael and Yitzchak, and Yishmael is a negative influence, and Sarah sees the future of the Jewish people, and she sees that the future of the Jewish people is going to come from Yitzchak, not from Yishmael. And she asks Abraham to send Yishmael and his mother away. And initially, of course, Abraham refuses because it is his other wife and it is his child. He doesn't want to send them away. It looks cruel. But what happens? It says, in that moment, Hashem says, whatever Sarah says, you have to listen. Whatever she says, you must do. What does that mean? What does that really mean? I mean, we're talking about two of the greatest people here. Nobody was like not seeing something in this situation. They were both very deeply connected, but they were seeing the same situation in two different ways. Abraham was seeing this situation in an aleph way, and Sarah was seeing this situation in a hay way. What does that mean? It says that the Talmud actually tells us that Sarah's prophetic ability was deeper than Abraham's prophetic ability, okay? But it says, Avram belonged to the world of Ma, the world of Aleph. And when he saw Yishmael, it's not that he wasn't in tune with human beings and didn't know what was going on. It says when he saw Yishmael, he didn't see him in the world of Hay. He saw him in the world of Aleph. And he saw how he operated in that realm. In other words, he saw his potential. He saw his newness. He saw what he could be. But Sarah saw him in the world of Hay. And she saw what he was. And she saw that it wasn't going to work. And she saw that she had to intercede and that Avram had to defer to her because she saw how this was going to play out in the world of hay, in the world of practical, how this was going to make a difference to the future of the Jewish people. It had to go through Yitzchak, not through Yishmael. So there's an example of that dynamic. Again, we see this dynamic again in the relationship between Yitzchak, Rivka, Yaakov, and Esav, right? The pasuk tells us that Yitzchak loved Esav. Now we have a description of who Esav is. He was not a great person, right? He had a lot of rough edges. And it tells us he loved him to the degree that he was about to give away, like, the future of the Jewish people. He was going to give him the birthright. He was going to give him our lineage. But it says that in this story, Rivka says, no, it has to work through Yaakov. And when you look at that story, it looks like she's being a bit like devious, like she creates a situation where she's a bit kind of hiding something from her husband. But what she's doing is ensuring that the Jewish lineage goes in the right direction, because she has prophecy and an ability to see into the world of Hay that this can't go through Esav, that Esav can't be the lineage that it's meant to go through. It has to go through Yaakov. And therefore, in the world of Hay, she makes what needs to happen. What's Yitzchak seeing? It's not that he's not in tune and he doesn't see who Esav is, but he sees Esav in the world of Aleph, in the world of who he was born to potentially be. The newness, what he could have been if he would have expressed himself in a different way, if he would have, we're all neutral. So if he could have come into the world and honed the potential and the talents and the abilities that he had, he could have been somebody very different. But Rivka saw how that played out in this world, in the world of Hay, and she knew that it wasn't going to come to good things, and she had to intercede, and she had to bring that into the practical real world. So there has to be place for both. You can't have Purim without Yom Kippur. You can't have a mundane day without tefillah. They have to work together. And you can't have the avot without the imahot. Both of those have to interact with each other. And they were the perfect coming together of these two worlds. They balanced each other out perfectly. And that's what they have to do with us. And that's how we integrate this into our personal lives. That was their mission. And that's our mission, is to reveal the Yud and the K and the Vav and the K in this world through the Aleph and the Hay. The combination of the Avos and the Imahos, right? And we asked a question, which was, why is there 3 and 4? And it tells us, the Talmud tells us that 3, because we know that numbers also always have mystical association, right? That 3 is the number of something new, of newness, because actually, if you think about even in a couple, right? There's the one who joins the other, and the child is the new thing that comes into the relationship that's a combination of the two. So 1 and 2 is just the two originals coming together. The 3 is the new thing that comes out of that dynamic. So 3 is associated with newness, and 4 mystically is associated with the number of receiving, processing, making it work. So that's why the Avos are represented by 3, which is about newness. The Imahos are represented by 4, which is taking that newness and revealing it and communicating it and bringing it into this world and making it work. So our whole mission always is to incorporate this formula. As Jews, every single one of us has to find a way to combine these two aspects, to combine the lofty and the detached and bring it down into this world and reveal it all the time. And we all the time alternating between the two. It's not neat, right? The day starts with tefillah. There's also tefillah in the middle of the day and at the end of the day, and we're hopping all the time. But that's the point, is that we're supposed to pull things out of those aleph spaces and then bring it into the hay. And even if you think of different points in our lives. So, for example, when a boy goes to yeshiva, when a girl goes to sem, they have this opportunity to kind of live in the world of aleph for a while, to live in the world of purity and learning and closeness to But then the trick is you can't live there forever. I mean, to a degree, even, maybe in your shift, but I'm saying you're still going to have to come home, and there will still be children and laugh and mess and noise and character building. And that's where the hay comes in, is to take, having been in that amazing space that gave you that kind of connection to the purity, now you've got to bring that down and reveal it in this hay world. And we know that also, if we talk about where we come from, right? We know that we come from the Imahot and Avot. We know that we come from these parents who are everybody's parents. We know that we come from a few different places, because nowadays, unless you are a Kohen or a Levi, most of us don't know which tribe we came from. One day we'll find that out again, but we also all come from a different tribe, and every tribe has its own kind of manifestation and way of bringing a different energy into the world. And we know that every single one of us has a different shape and form of neshama. And in fact, those of us that have just learned anything about the Sfiras HaOmer and the different Sfirot will know that every single one of those, Chesed, Gvura, etc., all reflect on having different type of neshamas. You can be a more chesed-oriented person, a more gevura type of person, a more netzach kind of person. So we come in many different shapes and colors. And actually going back to Shavuot, that was the idea of Shavuot, is that standing in the place of receiving the Torah in all our very different shades and colors, all attached to this one truth, right? That we are all different souls and tribes and colors and sects and shapes, etc. But we all have the same mother and the same father, and we all are linked back to this original mission, which is still our mission today. This is the mission that we try to kind of bring into the world every single day, in the way that we unite the world of Aleph and the world of Hey, which really means that constantly our job is to take the ordinary and make it extraordinary, reveal the extraordinary in the ordinary, but also that the ordinary is extraordinary. It's the constant interaction between the two. The ordinary is extraordinary, because if you're bringing in the world of Aleph into the world of Hey, then just being in an ordinary place where you're interacting with other human beings, the way you act, the way you talk, the way you speak, the way you know, those are all ways of taking Aleph and refining it and bringing it into Hey. That is the power of that name of Yud and K and Vav and K. That is the power of the union between the foremothers and the forefathers. And that's part of our DNA that's been passed on to us. So in a very real, deep way, we are deeply connected to the Abbas and Imahos were. They're very much part of us, not just because they're historical mothers and fathers, but because they're spiritual mothers and fathers, DNA mothers and fathers. They've passed on the mission to us. And each one of us, wherever we find ourselves, has an opportunity to act this out in our own lives, however observant, not observant, whatever opportunities do and don't come your way. There's daily, minutely opportunities to interact this Aleph and Hey, to turn ordinary into extraordinary, but to also recognize the extraordinary and the ordinary every single day. So I hope that everybody's able to take something practical out of that. And please, God, in the name of those that we are mentioning for Aliyat Neshama, to take those things and make them real. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Ora. Thank you, Ora. I have to tell you, the strange thing is that I'm not going to say, I'm just going to go get my challah dough, because, so I'm going to thank Dalia today for having been mafresh challah on her sourdough, which is quite amazing. We're making enough sourdough to be mafresh challah. And this week, I'm going to say thank you to you for doing that, and to anybody else who's been mafresh challah. And may we, Hashem, only share, well, as somebody here today said, he said, when we only share simchas, he said, it's not about only sharing simchas. The rabbi told him, and he said in Madeshev, you don't say it's not only simchas. What I want you to have is many, many simchas, but it's not always only about simchas. But we have the ability to rise above. So may we all merit to greet this beautiful Shabbos ahead, besimcha, and and everything that we take away. And thank you, Ora, that was beautiful. And Elaine, a pleasure for me to be able to share this with you, and looking forward to greeting some of you, and I hope all of you, many of you, with Rebbetzin, Rachel Silber in person. And the flyers will be out, so if anybody hasn't got the information, let me know, but just give me 10 minutes now. And there will be a booking link for Wednesday, but that will be only out in the morning. Okay? Wishing everybody a good Erev Shabbos, and thank you, and looking forward to being in touch. Good Shabbos from Eretz Yisrael.